Good afternoon and welcome, everyone, to Harm and Hope in a Polarized World. My name is Father Dan Griffith, and I am a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes in Minneapolis, and Restorative Justice Liaison for the Archdiocese. Here at the law school, I serve as founding director of the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing, and also as the Wenger Family Fellow of Law. The initiative was launched in September with a threefold focus on naming and helping heal harm from institutional and leadership failures, injustice, racial injustice, and societal polarization, which is our topic for today. Rooted in the culture and wisdom of First Nation peoples of New Zealand and North America, restorative justice has now become a worldwide movement because it is effective in healing harm and bringing together multiple stakeholders, and it's very adaptive across a number of disciplines and segments of society. Our work in restorative justice at the Initiative is rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition, and happily we have found, as other Catholic practitioners in restorative justice have found, that the aims of restorative justice align very well with the aims of Catholic social teaching. The prophetic critique of injustice and harm, the desire to bring about a more just world, the method of respectful dialogue, the goals of inclusion, and the desire for healing and wholeness all come together both in the work of restorative justice and Catholic social teaching. Today, we take up the topic of polarization, asking the fundamental questions of restorative justice. What is the nature of the harm? What are its origins? And how can harm be repaired and a better path taken? Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, permit me just a few minutes to put our work today and our conversation in context. Ezra Klein has written a new book that is called Why We're Polarized. It's right here. It's a wonderful read and an illuminating read, and I encourage you to give it a look and a read. In that book, he explains why polarization has accelerated greatly in the last 15 to 20 years. He also points back to the work done by Henri Tafel, who was a psychologist who did the work of group psychology, and explains that the movement toward us versus them, that binary, seems to be hardwired into us in many ways. Many of us see it in the sports teams that we root for. Just this morning in Wisconsin, we saw that the Packers raised $25 million in a stock sale for their team. And what's interesting about that is there is no dividend that is paid, no monetary dividend, no authority that extends to those who buy stock. But the dividend is that people belong. They have stock in the Packers. Now, lest I judge that harshly, I'm not a stockholder. I would say, in terms of that group psychology, that us versus them dynamic that we see in sports teams in American culture, I sometimes take more pleasure when the Vikings lose than I do when the Packers win. That's how strong that's rooted in our society and in our sports teams. Now, what's at stake in a more important way beyond sports teams and fandom for our republic? What does the future look like? Many of us were very, very dismayed and fearful when we tuned into the evening news casts on January 6th of the last year and saw the storming of the US Capitol. When Robert Gates, former defense secretary for multiple administrations, including Republican, Democratic administrations, was asked a number of weeks ago on 60 Minutes, what is the most important threat, the most acute threat to American democracy? Without hesitating at all, he named extreme polarization. So now we not only see it in the political sphere, we also see it in and among religious institutions, including in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, including in the United States, is as polarized as our ambient culture. Now, amidst the challenges of polarization, there are also signs of hope and of light. I'll share one anecdotally with you. Last month, I led a pilgrimage to Italy, and we had a very, very diverse group. I've done about 10 of these pilgrimages in 20 years of priesthood, and this was the most diverse group that we had. And I was nervous about this, and I even named it up front with the group. And I said, you know, we all share the fact that we are Catholic. We share our love of Jesus and Jesus's love for us. We also are called on this pilgrimage. And so rather than, as we spent a lot of time together, entering into whether somebody voted for Trump or Biden, there were bonds that were deepened. It was a sign for me of hope that when we come together in common purpose, we can strengthen those bonds of common humanity and, in this case, common faith. At the launch of the Initiative for Restorative Justice and Healing, Restorative Justice leader Cheryl Wilson, who is also an advisory board member, said, we need more people who can work in the middle, people who can transcend the us versus them binary that marks our present American culture. I am delighted that we have three such individuals with us today, individuals whose work is a sign of hope in a polarized world. And I'd like to introduce our panelists now. Georgetown law professor Amy Ullman is the director for mission and ministry, a lecturer at Georgetown Law, and a senior research fellow at Georgetown's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Her seminar courses help students develop the communication skills they need to foster understanding across deep differences. Her scholarship focuses on how religious values might shed light on tort law, legal ethics, and legal education, and how principles of dialogue might inform debates about religion in the public square. Previously, Amy was the founding director of Fordham University's Institute on Religion, Law, and Lawyers' Work, and an associate with the law firm Arnold and Porter. Our second panelist, in her first term, Representative Sandra Feist of the Minnesota House of Representatives demonstrated a gift for working across the aisle. Her committee assignments include education, finance, education policy, judiciary, finance, and civil law, also public safety and criminal justice reform, finance, and policy. Sandra earned a Bachelor's of Arts in History and Political Science from the University of Wisconsin and a JD from William Mitchell of College of Law. Sandra also teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, is a noted immigration lawyer, and spoke recently to Hank Shea and my class on restorative justice, law, and healing, which I'll reference in a few minutes. Professor William Doherty, Bill Doherty, is co-founder of Braver Angels and the creator of the Braver Angels Workshop Approach. Bill is professor and director of the Minnesota Couples on the Brink Project in the Department of Family Social Science at the University of Minnesota. Bill combines a background in family therapy and community engagement. And Bill, his work through Braver Angels has amounted in the last 5 years to over 500 workshops. He has been invited by a key committee of Congress to help there as well. Tomorrow, Bill will head out to Washington, D.C., where he will do work with members of Congress in a particular congressional committee. Bill's work has been featured on ABC's Nightline, on CNN, and many other news programs. So we welcome our panelists today. We will have time for questions as well. There is a question feature. There is a chat function as well to our attendees, and please definitely become engaged in the program. I now want to turn it to our panelists. And the first question that we are asking our panelists is to name the harm. This is part of what restorative justice and restorative practices seek to do. They seek to deal with reality as it is, not as we hope it might be or as an abstraction, but rather to name the present moment, including attendant harm. And so, if to use a lawyer's phrase, we would stipulate that we are living in a very polarized time and culture, I'd like to ask our panelists, and I'd like to begin by asking Representative Feist to speak about where she sees the harm in our present culture, including in her work as a representative in terms of polarization, to name the effects. What are the most acute effects of polarization as she sees it? Representative Feist, Sandra, please lead off.
Thank you. And I remembered to unmute myself, so I'm off to a good start. So I have so many thoughts, but I tried to keep my bullet points focused. I wanted to first start with a story. So I do believe that the biggest impact of this polarization is that we don't see our ideological opponents as full human beings. And I don't know that I had any specific idea of what type of legislator I would be in terms of bipartisanship. Like, I didn't think I would be super bipartisan or super partisan. I just hadn't really thought about it. But early on in my term, we were filling in a lot of HR paperwork, and I sent a reply all to the entire House of Representatives. And the minority leader sent me an email, and he was like, "Hey, probably be careful about reply all." And I was like, "Oh, that's helpful." And so that just kind of like struck me. I was like, "Oh, the Republicans are my coworkers." And then another thing that happened is I sent a joke that I thought was very tame to the entire House of Representatives, you can send an email to the House to see who wants to sign on to your bills. And this bill was a particularly bipartisan bill that I thought that Republicans may want to sign on as co-authors. And so I made a joke that I thought was tame. And then one of my DFL colleagues texted me, and he's like, "You sent that to everyone." So then I sent an email to everyone again, and I was like, "Hey, I thought that was funny, but if it was mean, I'm sorry. I definitely wasn't trying to be offensive, and now this is weird, so I'm just going to send this email." And then like all of the Republicans emailed me to laugh at me in a really nice way. They were like, "Yeah, no, it was funny," or "Oops, now you know, maybe don't send jokes." It truly was a tame joke, or I wouldn't have sent it to everyone. But it really helped me connect with my colleagues across the aisle in an unexpected way. And the person who the joke was about said it was hilarious, for the record. But just these experiences helped me to realize that I had really come into the legislature with this idea that I would be working with Democrats. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that the Republicans were also there as professionals representing their constituents who have very different belief systems than me, but that we were coworkers. Like, we would park in the parking lot, ride up in the elevator together when we were allowed during my COVID session. And that just really helped me like reframe what I was doing there. And just to give some really concrete examples of the ways in which this really hinders like good, sound policy, I'm very involved in literacy policies and very passionate about the issue of literacy. And interestingly, over time, the different philosophies of teaching reading have become partisan. like we know there's one way to teach reading that is the most effective way to do it. And yet there's like a liberal way and a Republican way. And for the record, like the conservative way is the right way. Like, we just know from science and like this huge federal study that was published 2 decades ago. And so just seeing like how nonsensical this partisan divide over something that is scientific. And obviously another example is climate change. But literacy just really struck me. I'm like, we know how to teach kids how to read. This shouldn't be partisan. And so we just see a lot of policy decisions that could be made based on rational data, that people are in their camps. And it really hinders our ability to look long-term and to make just sound, fact-based, rational policy. And I have a million other examples, but there are 2 other speakers, so I'll stop talking.
Great, thanks, Sandra. And Bill, what do you think in terms of the most acute effects, the mal effects of societal polarization?
Yeah, well, good to start off with some stories, Sandra. Those are that kind of grounds as well. And just to follow up, paralysis. We can't get stuff done. We can't get stuff done in legislatures. We can't get stuff done on COVID. When things become polarized, and in fact, in Braver Angels, we talk about red and blue, more conservative, more liberal. When a problem becomes colorized, like COVID and the vaccine, we lose our ability to deal with it constructively as a society. And there used to be problems that were not colorized, like the environment. Go back to Richard Nixon in the 60s and so on. It was not. It was like, okay, well, how do we make sure we have a clean environment, healthy environment, and people on both sides? But at some point, it became owned by the blues. And then the Reds turned off. And just for balance here, when conservatives started talking about family values, for example, family stability, then the blues get all upset about that and say you're trying to trap people into staying in unhealthy marriages. So family values became something we can't talk about. So we get paralyzed as a society. And I'll say this as a family therapist, is that I've never seen the level of rancor in family relationships over politics. And I've been practicing for over 40 years. And I'm old enough to have lived through the Vietnam era. People still have Thanksgiving during that era, okay? Now people are boycotting Thanksgiving. People are not only unfriending family members, loved ones on Facebook, in real life they are. And so we have at the level of our relationships, we are troubled and divided, and at the level of society, we are paralyzed to make forward progress.
Great, thanks, Bill. It reminds me of a answer that my father, Bill, gave to me when I said, "Dad, how's the family doing?" And he responded rather tersely, "We're divided." And then he talked about how the fact that some had chosen to get vaccinated, most in our family, a large family, others haven't. But I noticed that in looking at family gatherings, I had a level of anxiety leading up to these gatherings that I had never had before. Mm-hmm. And so we all feel that, and you put COVID in the mix as well. And there's just a lot of tension that people are feeling. Amy, to you, what do you think are the most acute effects, and where do you see that in your work as a professor and at the university, and where do you see it perhaps in the church as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're struggling with the most is the difficulty of getting out of binary thinking. And so this kind of this knot that so many feel, how can I be true to my values and at the same time be open to others who think differently? So this openness being interpreted as enabling evil, for example. And so you'll forgive me, but I'm going to use a couple images from Star Wars. And so this sense that there's the Force and the dark side. And so I think we need to review Return of the Jedi and remember that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, right? And so this sense of the complexity, and also appreciating that politics involves not only naming principles, but also the practical, as Sandra I'm sure well knows, also the practical hard work of finding solutions to concrete problems. And so I think one of the main difficulties is this talking past each other. So some on the level of principles, others on the level of practical problem solving, and we can't meet each other because there's not enough trust. I think that's one problem. The second problem I would name is really the difficulty of communicating. And I think lawyers struggle with this the most, this idea that when I listen, I'm actually just listening in order to debate. And so I'm collecting like bullet points in my head. One of my colleagues talks about, let's call them peace points instead of bullet points. But so this sense of collecting my points rather than actually trying to understand the person in front of me. And so, sorry, one more Star Wars image. I use this sound effect with my students to say, it's like, having the pistols that say pew, 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 right? When you're listening in that way, you don't even have time to receive the reality of the person in front of you. And so the difficulty of listening to understanding their humanity, their stakes. And so we have to, I think maybe another third kind of core problem is we just have difficulty slowing down enough to be able to encounter each other as humans in our way of communicating before we jump into these categorizations of each other's thought. So those are a few things I've seen in the classroom and in community life and in, all over the place in the culture.
Great, thank you. Thank you to all three of you. It occurs to me that restorative practices really can help overcome some of the binary realities and also invite that active, intentional listening. When Professor Shea and I have taught restorative justice, we have had a number of opportunities for students. They sit in a circle, there's a talking piece, and when you're listening, you're really invited to open yourself up to the story of the other. And it's very effective. And what we're hoping to do is help equip future lawyers with those skills of active listening. I want to talk about the origins before we move to the particular work that each of you is doing, which has been a sign of hope. I want to talk dig down a little more deeply into the origins. How did we get where we are? Ezra Klein notes the rapid acceleration in the last 15 to 20 years. Back in the day, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party were not all that different on a number of issues, but that has changed in the last 20 years. But also to pinpoint where American culture is and different aspects of American culture contribute uniquely from a cultural standpoint to the polarization that we see. And Amy, I'll start with you. If you want to just talk a little bit about the origins and also where the American culture contributes.
So I don't want to demonize social media, and I appreciate the fact that we're able to do a lot and kind of communicate in very active and creative ways. But I do think our patterns of communication and how they have taken us away from physical encounters or small spaces have really contributed to the intensity of echo chambers, where our friend groups are largely people who think like us, to the point that we don't even realize when we're in an echo chamber. And so it's almost like a meteor hits when something happens, and we can't even imagine how the other person thinks, because our friend groups are not crossing those lines. That's due to a lot of factors, also geography, or the ways that parishes might be geographically, the way that people kind of gravitate and move around in a space where they have the possibility to sort themselves out. There was a book done, I can't remember the date, 2008, I think, by Bill Bishop, called The Big Sort, which is kind of a classic in this area, on how just the geographical patterns have made a big difference. And then I think the ways that we are just grouping together for the kinds of conversations that we have do not necessarily push us into those more difficult spaces of encounter. It really takes a deliberate effort, and the algorithms of social media don't help with that. So I'll just name that as one area that I think many people struggle with, also because of the addictive nature of some of these forms of media that then become the primary space where a lot of people live. And so that's one difficulty I would name.
Great, thank you. Staying on the geographical part and the geographical divides, I've told my law students that when I go on my day off to northwestern Wisconsin, it is 2 hours away by car, but you might as well be on a different planet. The culture is so different from Minneapolis, from urban to rural. When I go into Ed's Pit Stop with my mask on, I'm viewed kind of almost like an alien. And yet there's something very attractive about the culture in northwestern Wisconsin that is, not self-important and not into all these kind of externals. And yet in Minneapolis, but we can't seem to come together in terms of common values in a way that is helpful. I want to turn next to Bill in terms of where he sees origins to our present polarization and including American cultural dimensions that are part of that story.
Yeah, so I'll name one really important one that doesn't get enough attention, and that is the decline in social trust that has been occurring since the 1960s in the country. People are asked every year in various polls, to what extent do you trust various institutions, government, religion, the courts, medicine, and how much do you think your fellow citizens are trustworthy, how much they will follow through on their word, for example. It's been a linear direct decline in trust for one another and trust in virtually all of our social institutions since the late 1960s. And combined with that, and Robert Putnam has written about that in Bowling Alone, is a decline in civic participation. So we don't trust each other. We don't participate. We don't join the Rotaries as much, the PTAs. Average church attendance has declined. And so we are more isolated, less trusting, and then we are more apt to be attracted towards certain identity groups that related to politics, related to religious sectarianism or whatever, in order to get our sense of social solidarity. Because we are social creatures, we human beings, we need community. And when the broader community, my neighborhood, my school, my church, where I'm apt to deal with some diversity among people, the bowling league, when those are gone, then I'm going to have much more my in-group. And my in-group is defined with who the out-group is. And so there are lots of explanations, but I wanted to highlight this one because the work that you're talking about in your center, Father Dan, and others, this is a work of restoring the social fabric. Okay, restoring social connections is part of the work of depolarization. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Sandra, what do you think on this question?
One thing that I was thinking about is that political strategy has led to some political atrophying on different issues. And so people feel like they don't have the flexibility to maneuver on different topics. And one example, I am an attorney who just decided to go into politics because I felt passionate about serving my community. And my Republican opponent was also just a businessman who was retired and was not a political operative. And he and I had a really interesting campaign where we had a number of debates where he felt comfortable saying that he had actually kind of been persuaded and changed his mind on the question of felony reenfranchisement. And I think that's just an example of where we should be able to be as public officials and just as people in the world, that we can be convinced that we can learn new things that aren't inside our bubble. And another example, just going back to literacy, somebody explained some issues around literacy, and I had to listen to 4 podcasts from 4 different reputable independent sources before I was like, oh, I'm okay, now I believe this. And that's, unfortunate. It shouldn't be so hard to change our mind, to engage with people who have different perspectives. And I know just in my life, I'm surrounded primarily by people who are ideologically similar to me. My community is very much on the same page as me. But since I became a public figure, I have communicated more with people who disagree with me than I have in my entire life. And it's actually been incredibly valuable. And I've just been able to see the real people behind these positions. And I had one email. We get a lot of template emails. And so I respond sincerely. And so I got a template email and it had some hyperbolic language, and I responded and I said, well, here's where I'm coming from. And then they responded and said, well, here's my personal experience with this issue and why I feel this way. And here's some additional resources. And we continued to engage. And we definitely are never going to agree with each other, but I'd like to think, like, I feel like it was helpful to me to humanize him and to hear more about why he sent me this template email about his own backstory. And hopefully it was helpful for him to see me as a real person, who's not just this like political robot who's going to always say the same things, but come to my own beliefs in a sincere way.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. Staying with you, Sandra, one of the things that we've seen, and Bill spoke about the fact that polarization really manifests itself in paralysis in terms of politically. There's been very few important bipartisan pieces of legislation that have gotten done nationally. There is a need for comprehensive immigration reform that has not been able to be solved. There was some positive work in the area of criminal justice reform, which was one of the only pieces of bipartisan legislation in the Trump administration. And now the infrastructure deal with some Republican support. Professor Shea and I were really impressed, as were our students, with regard to how you approach legislation, which is why we invited you to join today. And if you want to talk a little bit about your work in terms of the veterans immigration reform work, that was really, it's really important, it's needed, it aligns with certainly restorative justice, but really your methodology in terms of how you got that legislation passed, working with others, obviously. If you could speak to, now as we turn to signs of hope and light with our three presenters, because there are plenty of examples, we'll lead off with Sandra to kind of tell that story. And she's doing work now in terms of juvenile justice as well. So please tell the story.
Yeah, and you said veterans immigration, and I did have an immigration related bill, but I assume you just want me to
restorative justice.
Restorative justice.
Yes.
Yeah. I could talk about my U visa bill as well, but yeah, with respect to the veterans bill, it was an interesting place when I came to it, in that there had been a lot of gridlock, a lot of hard feelings, and just a lot of really tense kind of negotiations over the bill. So I came as a totally new person in the legislature. I was asked to come on because of my legal background, and I basically just approached the bill and the conversations with the assumption that everyone was coming to those conversations with sincerity, that they were not just trying to be jerks, and that they really had concerns, or that there's something else, that caused them to be in opposition to this bill, but that they were coming from a real place that I should respect. And so I had a lot of long, detailed conversations and was able to make a number of amendments to the bill to address a lot of the concerns, but not all. But I believe that one of the impacts of taking that approach of respect and believing that people are coming from a good place was that some of the tension around the bill was diffused. And that allowed us to get past certain benchmarks. And in the end, I was able to work with a Republican senator to kind of get those last maneuvers across the finish line. But I believe that the main thing that I brought to the process was a willingness to spend the time. In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about seek first to understand and then be understood. And so I really sought first to understand and respect where people were coming from before I made my points. And when I did it in a respectful, direct way. And I also think that as an attorney, I don't feel like disagreeing is personal. And so I never mean disagreement personally. I never take it personally. And I think that helpful distance was also a factor in getting the bill passed. That I was able to have negotiations in a way that were really positive. So for example, I was having a meeting with one of my key opponents who I got to know pretty well. And it was my birthday. So we talked a bit about my birthday and they wished me happy birthday and it was all very pleasant. And then we got down to business. And so I think like that approach to lawmaking can be really productive. I am like a genuinely nice person, but I'm not just like cannily nice. Like I don't wield my niceness. Like I feel like I can legitimately get along with people and work with them, even if we have big disagreements on a lot of things. And if I could just give one more example. Oh, no, you asked me to talk just about the Veterans Bill. If we don't have time, that's okay.
Well, yeah, and Sandra, just explain briefly, if you would, what the Veterans Bill seeks to do, because it's really important in terms of, and linking it back to trauma that comes from their service. If you could explain in a nutshell kind of what it seeks to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Veterans Restorative Justice Act basically provides a diversionary path where veterans who have been charged with certain low-level offenses relating to a service-related trauma or injury can, instead of receiving a sentence and charges, they'll receive treatment and interventions and support. And at the end of that treatment program, if they are successful, then those charges are dismissed. And that was a really big piece of this, because not only did we want people to get the treatment that they needed and provide an incentive to get that treatment and to get on a different path, but we also wanted to make sure that at the end of the process that they didn't have that conviction that would hold them back from having a full life after those charges. And it's a really innovative bill that also leverages the VA and the services that they can provide. And it's a really amazing bill that a lot of people worked on really hard for many, many years before I ever came into the picture. And I was really, really honored to carry it.
Great, thank you. That two principles that you highlighted are so important. One is presuming goodwill, to the presumption of goodwill in terms of creating the space for compromise, but also seeking first to understand. I'm reminded too that Saint Francis had the same message many, many centuries ago. Bill, you've done great work with the Braver Angels outreach and initiative, and it's been highlighted on so many news programs and the 500 workshop. Can you tell us a little bit about how that began and what are the fruits of that work and where you see it contributing in a way that can overcome polarization? If you can tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. So it was just about 5 years, almost from this day, that I got a phone call from a colleague of mine in New York City named David Blankenhorn, who had been on the phone with a colleague of ours, another David Lapp in Southwest Ohio. This was right after the 2016 election, which I'm sure everybody remembers well. And they were talking about how the experience in each of their communities was so different. In the Upper East Side of Manhattan, it was a funeral after Trump was elected. In Southwest Ohio, hope and change. And they decided on the spur of the moment to get 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters together for 13 hours over a weekend in December, early December of 2016 in Southwest Ohio. And they called me and asked me if I would be willing to design and facilitate the event if they recruited people. And I'd never worked in this area before, political polarization, but what the heck. And I thought it would be a one-off. We had a very powerful experience with people. And when we asked people why they came, this was South Lebanon, Ohio. They said they have a community they have schools to run, they have hospitals to take care of and roads to build, and we can't do this. We can't succeed with all this rancor. If we can't do what Sandra was talking about people doing, we can't make a community work. That's why they were there. That was their common concern. Just as Sandra, we care about veterans, we care about health. Most of us want people who've been in criminal justice system to be responsible citizens. We care about those things. Where we get hung up is we disagree about the means, but if we don't start with what we care about, and that's what happened. People, they cared about their community, they cared about their country. They're troubled by the polarization everywhere. And so I thought it was a one-off, be a great story. People didn't want to stop. We had a reunion, it cashed in another frequent flyer, a ticket to go back to Ohio, and we decided that we had to keep going. And so that was the launch of Braver Angels. By the way, it's 1,500 workshops, not 500 workshops.
Oh, wow.
We're all over the country. And the basic idea is Reds and Blues coming together for the common purpose of restoring a sense of bipartisanship and respect for one another as citizens. And a core decision we made early on is that at the leadership level, the board, the leadership team, the state coordinators, the local alliances, all of the leadership would be half red, half blue. So just as you said, Sandra, most of us hang out with our own group, our own silo. So for the last 5 years, I've been hanging out and having to do work with equal reds and blues, equal conservatives and liberals. And there is a process of understanding one another and a working out of differences because we have a common goal. We have a common goal. And so we have loads of workshops. We've got 10,000 members around the country. I'll just briefly give an example. We have workshops where we teach people the skills in communicating across differences. We've already talked about some of those. The first one is to connect and then share your point of view. Connect first, then share your point of view. And instead of you say up, I say down, you say hot, I say cold. You say up, and I said, I hear you on up. Up is important to you. Tell me a story about why up is important to you. And then you've softened to me, and then I tell you why down is important to me. So we have those workshops, and we also have our signature one is where we bring 8 reds and 8 blues together for either 3 hours or a full day to understand each other beyond stereotypes and see if they can find some common ground. And a key part of this, and I know certainly in the Catholic tradition, this is a big thing, is humility. We invite everyone in our workshops to articulate their concerns about their own side. So I'm a marriage therapist. You don't have chronic marital problems without both people contributing in some meaningful way. And if I come together to say, to point out your contributions, but not own mine, then we're not going to get anywhere. And so we invite reds and blues to say, how are we all contributing to the polarization and how can we work together? Then the last thing I'll say, so after doing this for a number of years, we now are getting interest from public figures, from county commissioners, from Congress. Sandra, a couple of years ago, I did a skills training for members of the legislature here. So we're getting interest then at those levels as well. So it's been quite an amazing journey.
That's great. And Bill, one of the questions that our Dean Vischer, often asks us when we're proposing new initiatives is it scalable? It sounds like this is scalable, that with the 1,500 workshops and the interest, that this could be something that the skills and principles could be utilized in university settings and in multiple civic settings. Do you think that this has real potential?
Yes, if you asked me this a couple of years ago, I would have said, I don't know, but now I believe it is. For instance, we've gone online, and so we have a really terrific social media workshop, how to be a braver angel on social media. Getting a lot of interest in that. We have a college debate program, as well as non-college, where people tackle very difficult issues in a civil way. And so I do think at this point that I have more confidence that it is scalable.
Great. And Amy, you've done great work, and I want to hold up Amy's book here, Healing Polarization in the Classroom, that she wrote with her colleague Michael Kessler. And Amy's done a lot of terrific work tackling polarization in the university setting and overcoming it through dialogue, through a lot of similar principles to what Sandra and Bill have noted in their work. If you could tell us a little bit about your work, what insights you've gained from that work, and then I have a follow-up question about polarization in the Catholic Church for Amy.
Okay, first, I just wanted to say how hopeful I am listening to Sandra and Bill. I mean, it's so this is the most important work that we can be doing in the political setting and just in our social life in general. And so I see in the university, one of the challenges, I think, is students are very, very fearful of either being perceived as judging others or themselves, getting stuck, right, in their relationships with each other. And so I think one of the challenges is to help them get out of an almost performative setting where they're speaking a script in a way that they're saying what's expected of them rather than giving the space to really dig deep within. So a lot of the techniques that we use in the classroom setting revolve around helping them to stop and reflect prior to entering into a classroom discussion, so they can just quiet down and own their own thought before they step into that space. So that's one kind of example. Then I see also there were lots of questions in the chat about the impact of COVID and the difficulty of coming back into social settings after lockdown. And here, I think the key word that also helps in university settings is small is beautiful. So as much as possible to come together in small groups where people can see each other, hear each other, if possible, eat together, right? We just did an exercise here, or in the middle of it, my office is covered with pies, where we challenge people to get 4 people together across any kind of difference, and set aside a time for a snack together. And so we had tons of signups, and because if they would do this, they would get a free pie. And so the students are now wandering into the office, very excited, also just about the something so simple as sitting down together and listening to each other with some icebreakers. And so I think in the wake of lockdown, and in the midst of the struggles with lockdown, we need to have the courage to be really, really simple in what we're designing. And so, and those, I think those are, they seem like, simple icebreakers, but they're really the key to rebuilding our social fabric, also through small groups. And then maybe the last suggestion that I have found really helpful in community work, and I've been working with the Polarized challenge, the Polarized Catholic community that's also doing work in dialogue. And what's been helpful for us is what we call the buddy system. And so to find a friend you trust with a different political perspective who can help you recognize how you sound in someone else's ears, and then talk through strategies for communicating. And so kind of a reality check that it's not just about my subjective perspective of how I'm projecting myself out to others, but actually what they hear and experience when I speak. And so I think those are all techniques that are also helpful in the classroom as well.
That's great. And I hear a common theme between Amy and Bill talking about the importance of connection. So before we start talking about what we believe on any topic, to actually connect on the level of our humanity, perhaps over a meal. One of the things that I think really helped our group in Italy was that we were there, we were connecting over in prayer and in breaking bread together. And so that was reinforced before we started talking about what we might disagree about. Amy, I want to stay with you and enter into polarization, a question on polarization in the church. So as I'm reading Ezra Klein and the fact that the us, them is kind of hardwired, and I think of Rene Girard's work in terms of mimetic theory, where, when we look at group dynamics and group psychology, we mimic behavior, and sometimes that mimicking of behavior perpetuates the us versus them. I've wondered, and obviously many people have written about the possibility about original sin and how that might be an effect of original sin, the idea of scapegoating. But certainly the ministry of Jesus, interestingly, was often done over meals and breaking of bread, that intimacy. But also what's interesting is he decidedly breaks down those barriers of us versus them. And it would seem to me if people of faith are going to be leaders in overcoming polarization, we have to confront why we see as acute polarization and its effects within the Catholic communion as we do in the broader culture, but more importantly, the radical call of Jesus to overcome that us versus them. So not only is he praying for their unity at the high priestly prayer in the garden the night before he dies, he's also going out and telling them to go out and build a global community to increase their numbers. And so the other line that came to me in prayer and in preparing for today is, he says, "It shall not be so with you." To his disciples, how can people of faith particularly given what they learn in Scripture. Jewish people, Muslim people, people who are religious, employ what they find in the wisdom of Scripture and the teachings of Jesus from a Christian standpoint to really work to overcome polarization, not only in society, but our own religious institutions.
Yeah, that's a really easy question, Father.
Sorry, I know you're up to it, though.
Well, I mean, I think one of the challenges that I see is religion generally seems to really intensify the stakes. And so some of the conversations that I've experienced in my own community life and my own parish life is that people are worried for the existential salvation of their friends, right? And so this sense of, if you're walking into this space and unaware of the eternal consequences of your choices, then it's my job to set you straight, right? And so I think part of what we need to work on is also some theological resources to help us process the depth of that intensity as we're working. And then again, the theological resources to help us understand these different levels of faithfulness to ideals and the difficulty of making those happen on the ground. And so spend more time with Sandra in conversation about, the actual work of politics. What does this look like on the ground? And I think those are areas where we need some help. Also seeing ourselves as the body of Christ, as one body, and all connected through shared projects. So whatever we're doing is connected, but that's difficult. We need some theological help for that. But I think the strongest resource that I feel in my own life is the example of Jesus on the cross. I mean, really able to go to the limit of a risk-taking capacity to enter into wounds and painful situations and to stay there rather than run away from it. So what does it mean to lean into those spaces of woundedness and suffering without pulling back? We can't do that on our own. I mean, that obviously requires the whole strength of the body of Christ. And so I think those are the kinds of resources that we need to tap in, recognizing that there's a lot of good intentions in the intensity of people's concern for each other across these lines, and then how we map that into our relationships and commitments does require time together also. I mean, as Bill was saying, understanding, what's at stake for you? What's the story behind that? So I think the workshop methods that he was describing can be extremely helpful for the life of the church, especially when we flank those with strong theological resources as well.
Great, thank you. And I'll ask a final question to our panelists because we're just about out of time. But Amy and I, in an email exchange, talked about how often, when people approach things in a way that is onto greater polarization, or the us versus them binary, how often that is coming from either a place of fear, but often a place of unhealed wounds. And that's where we can all do the work together of trying to heal and trying to seek healing in a way that is humble, as Bill noted. So final question, we just have a few minutes left, and then I've got a couple minutes where I'll end with some upcoming events. I want to ask our panelists one of two questions they can choose. We have a question in the queue. We need to, one reference to the pandemic and polarization, which Amy already tackled a bit. But the second question is, we need to go back to basics: respectful listening, fact-based questions, healthy discussion, debate, learning or relearning these skills in the family, school, college, church. Your thoughts on how to tackle. And I would add to that, and each panelist has about a minute, sorry for that. If you want to say, is there one most important thing as we approach Thanksgiving and the ongoing need to overcome polarization, one thing we can do in our own lives? So to either of those questions, why don't we'll stay with, actually we'll go to Bill first, and then we'll go to Sandra and back to Amy.
So very briefly, one thing, when there's somebody in your life who has a passionate view that's different from yours, try to get their story. Behind every passionate view is a story. There's a life experience. There is often pain, there is fear, there are hopes and dreams. Get their story and don't argue back while you're getting their story.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And Sandra?
I was going to say the same thing. I was just going to come back to the whole seek first to understand and then be understood. I've found in my political life that this has been extremely productive. So I was able to get a bill passed around immigration. And I did that by understanding what the opposition might be and what they were concerned about and addressing those concerns proactively and respectfully. And then just in my personal life, I am happier because I approach all of my interactions with people who I don't agree with from that perspective. And I just feel like being happier is good. So I would encourage everybody to come at these conversations with that in mind.
Great, thank you, Sandra. And Amy, penultimate word here.
Great, Sandra, that was beautiful. Thank you, Sandra and Bill. It's so wonderful to take to heart that advice. I guess the word I would have is getting a kind of comfort with our own limits. A phrase that helps me a lot in teaching is the teacher appears when the student is ready. And so I may not be the one to see another person blossom or pull it together or even understand me. That may be sort of down the road in their story. And so not to have to insist on a kind of timing of deep understanding or perhaps even the transformation of another person. There was a question about not judging another's soul, and I think that's absolutely right, that this sense of the limits of how people unfold over time, and that's ultimately the work of, I would say, the spirit in their life and not up to me. So a kind of peace maybe when I meet limits in conversations, that I may not be the protagonist in any kind of change that might be up to someone else, and it might be over time.
Great, thank you. And not surprising that folks who have done so effective work in their areas, there's so many shared values and approaches among our three presenters. I would highlight the importance of storytelling and listening to someone's story. Again, that's how Jesus ministered, and it's part of restorative justice. It's at the heart of restorative justice, being open to the story of another, as Bill had mentioned, and Amy and Sandra had talked about as well. I want to thank our panelists. Just a terrific program today, and I wish them the best in their very, very important work. And I would love to bring them back at a future time to, we could talk about this for a couple of hours. I just want to highlight a few things and a couple final thank yous before we sign off. Again, I want to thank our panelists for their generosity of spirit and their wisdom today. I want to thank Julie Craven, who is the Associate Director of the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing, my colleague and friend, Carrie Hilger, at UST Law, and of course, Dean Rob Vischer and President Julie Sullivan for their strong support of our new initiative. I want to thank those who have helped, including Xander, with our webinar. Two things that are forthcoming in December and January. We will have a web page that is now being developed that we will send to all of you when it is complete, with a lot of different resources, including highlighting the work of our panelists as well. And we're excited about that. We have a terrific advisory board, of which Amy Ullman is a member. And so we will highlight all of that in an upcoming submission of our webpage. And then in January, we will have a program, Wisdom from the Wound, a conversation with victim survivors and victim advocates. And that will either be mid to late January. We're getting schedules together now, but look for that program. And then Julie, in February, we'll have an international conversation among restorative justice practitioners doing this work via technology and Zoom. Amy had rightly noted some of the challenges of technology. One of the advantages is we can have Amy in Washington, D.C., Bill and Sandra in Minneapolis. I'm in Northwestern Wisconsin, quarantining, by the way. And by the way, I'm in my slippers, and none of you know that. That is one of the advantages of technology. So thank you to everyone. A big thank you to our panelists. And please look for more programming from the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and remember to do everything you can during that holiday to overcome polarization. God bless you. Take care.